Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to another episode of Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd.
As a business and healthcare law firm, we meet many interesting people in various stages of their business. Mm-hmm. This season, we get to focus on the high-stakes implications of selling a business. This season's theme is the Hitchhiker's Guide to M&A. We have been guest-heavy all season and have brought in different professionals to offer their experiences and perspective on M&A.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, Michael used the fancy word M&A. That means mergers and acquisitions, which really is just the buying or selling of a business or buying or selling of all the assets of the business. Now, Michael, today we have guests joining us from another country. Do you think they speak English?
Well, Brad, first, they are here with us right now.
Sure.
So that's kind of an awkward question. 2, do you have a plan on how we would have an episode with people that don't speak English, given our very limited language understandings beyond English?
That's probably true. I barely speak English as it is.
You speak Brad.
I do speak really fluent Brad.
Yeah. So why are you bringing this up?
Yeah, well, our guests live in different cities in Canada. We have one in Calgary, the other one in Montreal. And what I was thinking about was Calgary's on Mountain Time Zone, Montreal's on the Eastern Time Zone, and we're sitting here in Central Time Zone.
What I'm hearing is that I think you might need some summer school. Because you think that somehow language relates to time zone?
No, they don't relate.
No,
okay.
No, Brad.
Well, and more interesting is both our guests went to Oxford University in United Kingdom.
Well, you're really looking bad now.
And fun fact, today, as we're recording this, my daughter is actually visiting Oxford while we're recording this show.
Wow.
So I was thinking about if we decided to add my daughter to this podcast, we'd have to get her from Oxford, and they're under right now BST, which is British Summertime, which is interesting. Sometimes they move over to Greenwich Mean Time, and that really depends on the type of year. It seems like a lot of math involved. Yeah,
and you're probably losing our guest. You're definitely losing me, and I can't even imagine what the audience is doing right now.
All right, well, just today's show, Riley had to coordinate 2 countries, 3 different time zones, and obviously for the show to work, since they're here, it's working. But if we couldn't agree on common time references and we kept splitting up time differences between whims of each city or state or country, it'd be really hard to coordinate calls or meetings, and more importantly, this podcast.
Your deep thinking knows no ends, Brad. Yes. I'm not sure where you're going with this.
Yeah, well, for those who don't know, scientists right now are struggling to know what time it is on the moon. Currently, their moon missions are run on time zones off whatever country it is that's actually operating the spacecraft. Mm-hmm. So the moon, we've talked about this in other episodes, a new hotspot. Everyone wants to go there, including private companies, and everyone wants to capitalize on the moon. And they want to figure out, the European Space Agency wants the moon to have its own time zone.
It's all making sense now. If it wasn't an 80s movies reference, it was going to be some sort of sci-fi space-related topic.
I love space. Well, so this is, Michael, how loony it gets, pun intended. On the moon, clocks run faster, and each day lasts as long as 29 and a half Earth days. But do not panic. Again, the good news is the International Consortium of Experts are going to take this challenge on. So with their pocket protectors, their protractor rulers, they plan to map out new time zones on the moon. I just hope they don't do the whole daylight savings time thing.
Well, I'm not panicking because I did not know that this was a problem that needed to be solved.
No.
I'm glad to hear that it's being solved. Yeah. And seriously, that was pretty more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, well,
you redeemed yourself a little bit.
Awesome. All right, well, Michael, we have our guests who are patiently waiting. And before we bring them on, this season we've really been concentrating on the M&A and talking about what that looks like. And then that's part of a season in business. And we've talked about it in each episode, but maybe you can give the audience members who are listening to the very first time a quick recap.
Yeah, and we've talked all season about the importance of the seasons of a business. I love that we have some buyers on today that can validate, hopefully, the premise, which is that every business is in one of 4 seasons. They're in the building season, they're getting their infrastructure in order, or they may be in the operating season, living the day-to-day grind. They may be scaling in that season, or they may be in the buying and selling season. And the premise is that every single season plays a role if you end up selling.
Yep.
And so it's important to pay attention no matter where you are, which is, of course, our episode, all the episodes this season, our theme has been M&A, the Hitchhiker's Guide to M&A. And we talk about the 5 phases to an M&A deal. You have the LOI, due diligence, the definitive agreements. Then we go to closing and post-closing obligations. And so we'll look forward to getting the perspectives today from our guests.
Yeah, well, Michael, why don't you bring on our guest today?
Okay, so we have Daniel Schacter and Sean Walsh with Cosmetic Physician Partners joining us. So now we have 4 of us on. We've pulled this off a couple times now.
Yes.
So Dan is the president of Cosmetic Physician Partners based out of Montreal, Quebec. He has successfully built 2 companies from the ground up. His most recent having been growing a company from a valuation of $10 million and 12 employees to $500 million with over 400 employees. He's trained in accounting at Deloitte and operations management and sales growth at McKinsey & Company. Dan holds a BCom in accounting from McGill University, an MBA from Oxford University, as you mentioned earlier, where he graduated with first-class distinction and on the dean's list. If you need, we can, after the show, I can explain what all these means, but they're really important.
Yes,
right?
Sounds really good.
This is also Dan's second time joining us on the podcast. And today joining is Sean Walsh. He is the vice president of partnerships at Cosmetic Physician Partners. Sean brings strategy and finance capabilities to CPP, developed through his experience with Boston Consulting Group and TriWest Capital Partners. Sean is responsible for onboarding new clinics at CPP Partners, managing the legal, financial, and operational requirements and processes. Sean has a Bachelor of Engineering from the University of Victoria and, as mentioned earlier, an MBA from the University of Oxford. And I hope you just feel a little less smart right now, Brad.
I feel always a lot less smart.
Okay, so we just need to stick to the questions today and let them do the answering.
No doubt.
Okay, great.
Well, welcome, guys.
Thanks so much for having us on the show.
Well, gentlemen, since y'all are a lot smarter than us, maybe y'all can help us out here. There are all these different time zone talk that we had earlier. Do you have any recommendation to the scientists that are coming up with this new moon time zones?
I don't have a recommendation, but I didn't know that. I didn't realize there were 29 hours in a moon day versus a regular Earth day. I never even thought about the time. What time would it be in space? But
yes.
It's a good question.
All right. Well, again, we appreciate you guys being here, and I guess we'll jump off time zone and moon zone talk. Michael, maybe we can just jump into why we brought them on.
Yeah. Well, first, I'd love to hear just a little bit from each of you. Talk to us about Cosmetic Physician Partners, introduce the CPP to our audience, and a little bit about what your roles are.
Absolutely. Sticking on that moon theme, it definitely feels a bit like on a rocket ship right now. So thanks for having me on the show. It's CPP's been a really fun ride. We started back in Canada around 15 years ago, building up our Canadian side of the operation. And what we realized early on is clinic owners generally are phenomenal at treating patients, and they are really, really good at customer experience, but they might not be so great at a lot of the business administrative type of processes, accounting, finance, cash management, and then even a lot of the times in marketing. Some are great at it, some need a lot of help. So, that's where physician CPP comes in. Today, we're building one of the largest networks of medical aesthetic practices across the U.S. We have more than 20 clinics doing more than $100 million of revenue and growing extremely fast. And, I'd say there's 3 things that really make us unique relative to some other groups is we're very people focused. Every single clinic before joining, we go out and visit in person multiple times. You might say, isn't that table stakes? It isn't. People write checks without ever meeting the clinic. It's crazy. Two, operations. We are massive on the operation side. We've built the business in Canada for over 15 years, done extremely well. The US side is now very, very large and very healthy. We do it through amazing central teams like marketing, IT, HR, so on. I think, I'm a data guy, so the numbers speak, growing more than 10% year over year for same clinics and profits more than 30%. Finally, we've actually done it before. So in Canada, last year we did a 9-figure liquidation where a lot of our partners were able to take some money off the table, but still stay in place and still keep running the business and still have upside in the future. Remember, if my data serves right, I don't think any other group has ever done that in this sector before. So, we have the background to do it, but we've also, proven the results. So, that's a little who we are.
That's awesome.
That's amazing. I'd love, Sean, talk a little bit about your role with CPP.
You bet. So as the Vice President of Partnerships, I am responsible for every step that starts with engaging new prospective partners, people who are interested in joining CPP, all the way to supporting them as they come on board and start to use CPP's systems and every step in between those. It's really, really exciting to watch these, as Daniel said, these like great little businesses join into the network and take advantages of both the resources that a company like CPP has to offer and the benefits of scale, such as purchasing. So really just getting them up to speed so that they can operate as great partners within the CPP network.
Very cool. And, and as Michael mentioned, Dan, you were actually on our episode in season 8. And, since season 8 to now, it sounds like y'all are growing a lot. Is there anything else that's happening at CPP that's changed since the last time you were on?
It's a good question. I think before the show, Sean did some quick math. Apart from adding, 17 practices to our group, we've built out a number of central teams that are just dedicated to our clinics. So everything from IT and analytics to we just built a new best practices team who goes into clinics and takes the best practices from all the other clinics and just like one really cool technique after the other. We were looking at one the other day with a different type of needle that has dramatically reduced shrink, meaning the waste of like Botox or Dysport. Just like a small thing like that can save hundreds of thousands of dollars to a clinic. So imagine what you could do if you had a 30-page book of it. So a lot of cool stuff going on here.
And yeah. I'm going to ask a question I know the answer to, but I'd love for you to share. You guys acquire or partner with practices that are both surgical and non-surgical? Correct.
We have just pure, you can call non-core, just med spa onlys, as well as plastic surgery med spa or derm med spa. Those are the typical 3 that are part of our group.
And are there any certain areas of the country that y'all are focused on, or is it just world domination?
We care a lot more about the people than the location. So you can imagine our frequent flyer miles are very high traveling around the U.S., but it's the people that we're focused on and a little bit less the location.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Cool. Well, good. Well, kind of talking about deal flow a little bit, I'd love to hear from you guys some lessons you've learned kind of as a buyer. And for a little context, we've spent a lot of time this whole season trying to educate our audience on M&A, and we've had different guests on, and you bring a unique perspective as someone who's actually on the buy side looking to acquire. And so we'd love to, kind of hear from your view of the world, some lessons you've learned when looking at the potential sellers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my number one lesson, and then maybe Sean, you can say what you think it is on your end, is culture matters. And you'd say, well, yeah, I get culture matters, but I really do mean that. We have found statistically that a strong culture has like a 90% correlation with high profit. And what ends up happening is clinics that have a strong culture, you walk in the door and you can feel it, from whether it be the music to the way the front desk smiles at you, to the way the provider treats you as they walk you to the room and explains how things are going. interactions in the corridor, patients have higher retention, patients are more willing to spend, patients, want to be there. So then, one of the biggest learnings I have is if you set the right culture, everything else is secondary to that. And that's really what leads to an amazing success and what we look for in a great clinic.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, a follow-up question is, how do you discern culture when you're looking at a target?
Yeah, it's a great question. So number one, we visit every single practice. I have been to, I think, almost 70 practices in the last year and a half.
Oh, wow.
That is a lot of flying.
It's a lot. It's a lot. You feel it the moment you walk in the door. I'm sure you guys, walk into it doesn't have to even be a med spa. You walk into a hair salon, walk into your dentist office. The way the front desk talks to you, the way that people talk about each other in the office, how do they talk about the MD or the owner? All of those things really quickly get us a good sense of culture. I mean, we go over and above that. We have lots of surveys that we can do, and we do on a pre-acquisition side as well as post-acquisition. It matters, but you don't even need a survey. Like I think our spidey sense is good enough now, where you walk in and you meet a few people and you'll know very quickly if culture is good and healthy there, or if there's some underlying problems.
Well, you're speaking Brad's language when you called it spidey sense.
Yes. I like that a lot. I put a check mark next to your name, Dan. Sean, are you any thoughts on that one too?
Yeah, I think it, always interesting. I absolutely agree with Daniel. There's maybe two things I would pick up that I've learned through our work at CPP. The first is building trust in the M&A process. That's been kind of an evolving thing for us. When CPP was getting started, we were starting with people, a relatively tight-knit community. And so I would say, like, a lot of people knew each other and we could go off our word. As we grow as a network, really, I think you guys will know that there are examples in the market of M&A that doesn't always go well. And so one of the big things about CPP is honesty and transparency, and really establishing that trust through the M&A process, and in different ways you can do that. That's been both really fun and interesting, but always a challenge is how do you establish that trust with the counterparty to tell them that their business is safe if they choose to join the partnership.
That's a
the other thing.
Go ahead,
I think that you're likely a number of the listeners can relate to is M&A can be very exciting, but the big part of it, and what I would argue is probably the most important part of it, is the integration side of it, and it can occasionally get lost in the heat of the M&A, but it's far more important in terms of the successful outcome of clinics joining a partnership. So those have been two big learnings for us as we grow as an organization.
Yeah, great points.
Yeah.
And Michael mentioned earlier the 5 phases of M&A deal. And as you guys are aware of, each phase has its own unique aspect to it. But in y'all's opinion, what do you think is the hardest phase and why?
You want to take that one, Daniel, or do you want me to? Yeah, yeah. Just picking up on that same thread that I ended on. The integrations work. Every business is unique. It has its own way of working. They have organizational habits. They're used to doing things a certain way. But in order for them to take advantage of joining a network like CPP, they need to integrate, at least in part, with systems we have, whether that's our IT, they like to use our marketing, our data and analytics. It introduces a new way of working. And as mentioned, you can get very busy in the legals and the diligence work and forget that come joining CPP, things change. And how do you set them up for success as part of that? Especially when it's, the office manager is underwater running a business, and then you add in M&A to that, and then you have to teach them to work within our systems. That there's a lot of work there. And that's where the focus needs to be as part of the whole process.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dan?
Couldn't agree more. We in the last 6 months, we built out an integration team who co-locates at the new clinic to take that work or some of that work off the clinic for exactly the reason Sean said. So couldn't have said it better.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'm gonna have you take your CPP hat off for a moment and just put yourself generally in the shoes of buyers in general, and so you'll be looking more broadly and just help educate our audience on some of the mistakes you've seen from buyers generally that can bog down the process, and if it were fixed, it could make it more efficient.
Yeah, I guess good question. I can think of two situations off the top of my head. One which happened recently. I think there's a mistake in a lot of people are going to hear about multiples, meaning you take your profit and you multiply it by that multiple number, and that gets you to the value. And a lot of people forget that there's two sides. There's the multiple, but there's also the profitability. So we had a clinic who just joined, who was with another group before that. They did the LOI and they got to the end. And when you get to the end of the LOI process, before you close, you do something called a quality of earnings, where you have there's an accounting firm that comes in and looks at your books. And without going into too many details, the profitability dropped by like 30% between the start of the M&A and that's it. So when they started, they thought the multiple was really good, but they had a really, really low profit, or a much lower profitability than they thought was right. And I think the mistake some people make is that they focus too much on that multiple and not the whole thing, which in my opinion is the final number. Is the final number a really good number or not? Does it stay there? And in this case, it led to the deal with that other group collapsing, and then coming and joining us and having a really straight deal from the whole time. So how I think that would be what I noticed.
How much work, and I'm not necessarily asking CPP and specifically, but how much work do the buyers put into trying to get a good profitability number at the LOI phase?
It should be a fair bit of work, right? Like you hire an external accounting firm, and these things cost well over $50,000 paid by the buyer, not the seller, to do the work. Mm-hmm. The issue there is that there's two ways it can be done. One way is that it's done together, meaning the accounting firm is working both very closely with the buyer and the seller in a transparent way to show what the numbers look like. We've also seen situations where it's done just with the buyer. And as everyone knows, if I ask you, what color is the moon, there's 20 different answers you can give. The same is true with the Q&A. So, we're big believers in doing it very close together, but you do see some of those times where it's very much one-sided and the number can be very different. So, our advice, and a big call out, is work together with the accounting firm during that Q of E phase really closely. And, if you're a seller, demand that you're working very closely with it. Otherwise, you can see your profits drop really quickly. And that dramatically changes the final number you get.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sean.
One thing to one of the things we try and do, because as you indicated, some of these businesses don't always have the cleanest books. So you're showing up, you're trying to prepare an offer off incomplete information. And one of the things we try to do to the best of our ability, one is transparency. Hey, we can work with your accountant one-on-one. Then they're validating what you're coming up with. But two is making sure everybody is comfortable with the mechanics. So you outline, here's what revenue is, right? If you're getting revenue from a side business that we're not buying, we can't count that as revenue. Here's what a personal expense is that we're going to pull out. And one of the ways we do that is we actually just give them the workbook and we say, put your own numbers in, test our assumptions to see what happens if we find additional personal expenses we can come up. it's never going to be perfect. We've yet to really nail exactly down to the cent what the profit figure is. But creating that transparency is key. So at least they understand the mechanics. So when we get into the QV phase, they understand the works that's getting done, and they can test and prod and make sure it's above board.
Excellent. Just as I expected, you guys were amazing and insightful and brought a different perspective to what we've been walking through this entire season. We're grateful to have both of you on, and so we appreciate it. We'll go next into commercial. We'll say goodbye to you guys, go into commercial, and on the other side, Brad and I will do a little legal wrap-up.
Yeah, thanks for joining, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks so for having us on.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
Welcome back to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto. I'm still here with my co-host, Michael. Now, Michael, this season theme is Hitchhiker's Guide to M&A. And today's show, just like the whole season, we've been focusing on M&A, but I love the fact that Sean and Dan from CPP joined us to really focus on the buyer side of a deal.
Yeah, and they walked us through. First of all, if you weren't intimidated by their credentials, we sure were.
I was.
I mean, yeah,
yes.
We were almost afraid to ask the questions. Very impressive guys, and what's really unique about them at CPP is that they've been around doing this in Canada for several years. I think they said 15 years.
Right.
And so they bring some experience on physician consolidation to the United States, and it's at least in aesthetics, this is a newer market. It's
Sure.
The last couple of years is when you've really seen kind of some major growth in this area, and so it was really interesting to gain some perspective on what they look at and how they experience things, because I think it can be really insightful for the rest of our audience who may be a seller or a future. Everyone potentially is a future seller,
Right.
And so, and then of course for the buyers out there, they may have gained some wisdom as well.
Sure.
Talk about your takeaways from today, Brian?
Yeah, so I think, we often talk about in the 5 phases the post-closing legal obligations, and that may be, certain things have to get filed, and we often say that's a boring phase because the deal's been closed. But I thought Sean and Dan brought up some great perspectives of the non-legal things that happen post-closing. And that really is understanding, hey, you're doing a shift here. You once may have used this technology to record your billing, but now you're using our technology. And you may once have used this type of needle, but we found one that's better and it's still consistent with standard care, and it's going to save you a lot of money. Or we now know how to market you a little bit differently, and that's why you're partnering with us. So that shift from those post-closing obligations and really onboarding those new practices into the CPP model, I thought was fascinating to hear their perspective. And I think Dan said this, which I think is really important takeaway, is culture matters. And so when they walk in and they see a place that's incredible culture, I think they also know on the back end, when after the deal is done, if you have a great culture with great attitudes, there's going to be a lot of new learning that they're going to have to figure out your team. And I believe that's going to help them transition better into the CPP model. So again, for all the individuals out there, understand if you are looking at a deal, understand that you will be partnering with these people from 3 to 5 to 10 years, and you really want to understand how will your team react to that. So I thought it was all really great takeaways. Michael, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think multiple times this season I've talked about kind of this idea that buyers tend to either look heavy at the team or heavy at the compliance, that as the things that can make or break a deal. And And so clearly, you hear the answers today, and CPP is a team oriented. Not to say that compliance isn't important. It's not that at all. It's this, that they identify that as kind of the secret sauce. And I loved the Spidey sense thing.
Oh yeah.
But what does that even mean? How do you do the Spidey sense? Well, it's spending time. I mean, building trust, going and laying eyes on it, was really insightful. And that actually connects to the other big point he had, which was kind of mistakes made, and talking about, everyone lumps onto the multiple that people get and forget about the valuation or the number, the profit number, and how do you arrive at that? And so again, the challenge at the front end is, how do you come together and agree on what's a good profit number to hopefully minimize the chances that this Q of E would skew a 30% change in numbers that would, really threaten the deal. And so my overall takeaway is that, they really prioritize investing time into the buyers for that future partnership. And, of course, I guess you knew that, Brad, because you started the day talking about the moon and time issues. So maybe the people that are all coming together to figure out what the time zone should be in the moon can take a few lessons from CPP.
Love it, Michael. All great points, audience members. Well, Michael, unfortunately, next week we don't have smarter people joining our podcast. It's just going to be you and I. But we will take a deep dive in negotiation tactics for M&A deals. Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.